This is The Feed, York Region's only news magazine dedicated to the issues, events, and stories that matter to all of us who live and work here.
And while the world waits, worries, and wonders, we ask, where do we go from here? Noah Shack is VP Countering Antisemitism and Hate, UJA Federation of Greater Toronto. Thank you for joining us, Noah.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was announced earlier this week that police will be stepping up their presence and protection leading up to and including October the 7th, and really particularly paying attention to Jewish and Muslim gathering places. It's a sad reality, but it's something that's reassuring as well. What are your thoughts on this increased protection?
Well, the one-year anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attacks takes place right in the middle of the Jewish high holiday period. This is when Jewish families are gathering together to celebrate a holiday, the most important holidays of the year, many going to their synagogues to pray, similar to Christmas or Easter for people outside of the Jewish community. It's deeply disturbing that our celebration of our holidays has to take place under police protection. And it's a stark reminder that Jewish people were targeted specifically with these terrorist attacks during these holidays, and that here we are with increasing threats over the last year of hate crimes running rampant throughout our city, across our country, and around the world targeting Jewish people. It's a scary reality and something that all Canadians should be taking note of, given the impact that it's having on our cities and our country as a whole.
And there's been a rise in hate crimes and anti-Semitism in the GTA since that shocking day last October the 7th. Why?
But truly, it makes no sense to me why anybody would commit a hate crime, and yet we're seeing Toronto police reporting that hate crimes targeting Jewish people have increased by nearly 70% over the last year since those terrorist attacks. What we're seeing is people, extremists, using a foreign conflict to justify and make excuses for unleashing a wave of hate and violence targeting Canadians. That's something that we all need to reflect on, that this has continued to increase over the last year, and it's not going away. And it's something that we all have a responsibility to stand up against as Canadians. Because if we don't, it's going to overtake our society writ large. Yes, of course, personally, as a member of the Jewish community, knowing that children are being bullied in schools, people are being discriminated against in their places of employment. We've had schools shot at. We've had businesses torched to the ground. We've had people assaulted in the streets. This is deeply disturbing, and it's not abating. It's continuing to grow, and we all need to stand up against it, not just because it's targeting my community, but because if we don't, it will continue to destroy the very fabric of our society. And we really shouldn't tolerate people taking something that's happening half a world away and using it as an excuse to drive hate, violence, and extremism here in Canadian streets.
And so you say we shouldn't tolerate this, but how do we then express that lack of toleration? We do not tolerate, but how do we express that safely?
Well, I think it's important for people to speak up and to speak out and to let their elected representatives know that this isn't something that can be swept under the rug, because there's a limit to how much we can put our head in the sand and ignore what's going on before it overtakes us. Now is the time to let your elected representatives know that hate has no place in our society, not just in terms of words, but that we need action to push back against it. And as we've seen in a number of instances, the moment there's even a little bit of pressure applied back against these extremists, they buckle, they fold. And I think that while it can be a scary thing to stand up on your own, the more people raise their voices in unison in a chorus, that can have really powerful impact and can do a lot to drive back against these relatively few people who are having outsized influence in our society right now, spreading hate and violence and extremism.
Noah, I want to go back to October the 7th, 2023. So the conflict in the Middle East has now reached a fever pitch right now, and it has expanded beyond many of the borders. Will this take away from the urgency to get the remaining hostages held by Hamas released?
I don't think anything can take away from the urgency of getting those hostages home with their families where they belong. It is intolerable that these people have been suffering in a Hamas terror dungeon underneath Gaza for a year. I can't even imagine what they must have been going through, what their families have been going through day in and day out over the last year. And while war is an awful thing where people suffer, it's unacceptable that their situation continues another day. And at the same time, we know that terrorist organizations like Hezbollah are planning to do more, to abduct more innocent mothers and children, to brutalize and murder grandparents, to do horrific acts that are frankly unspeakable. And it's incumbent on any government that faces that kind of threat targeting its people to take action to prevent it. And, I think it's important that we put ourselves in the shoes of ordinary Israelis and think, what would we expect our government to do if we were facing those threats to protect us? At the same time, also to remember that Canadians here in the GTA can do very little to affect change half a world away. But what we are seeing is the conflict overseas playing out in our streets and being abused to justify, in the minds of extremists here in Canada, acts of hate and violence that have been growing significantly in a really disturbing way over the last year. And that is something we can do something about. That is something that we have a responsibility to do something about as Canadians, and that we need to take action, not just to address what's happening today, but to prevent it from continuing to grow and impacting our future any more than it already has.
And so a reality check here. We are dealing with Hamas. Can we still harbor hope that the hostages will eventually be released?
Well, I think I certainly have hope. You have to cling to hope of a better future when the times are so dark. I'm hopeful that the hostages will be reunited with their families. It's a lonely holiday period for their families who are continuing to suffer without their children, their brothers, their sisters, their parents, who remain hostage underneath Gaza, captive by Hamas. It's a painful time for those families, many of whom have relatives here in Canada, even though tragically all of the Canadians who were taken by Hamas on October 7th have been murdered. Many of those who are still held captive do have relatives here in Canada. It's a heartrending time for them, and they have shown just tremendous strength through this entire ordeal. And I think it's important that they know that they have an entire Jewish community and broader Canadian community that's standing with them in an embrace as they wait to bring their family members home.
Noah Shack, as the VP Countering Antisemitism and Hate for UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, what will you be thinking about on Monday, and will your actions speak louder than your words?
Well, there's going to be a tremendous gathering of people on October 7th that is being organized by UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, and I encourage people who want to show their support for the hostages and to stand against all of the horrors that have transpired both on October 7th last year and everything that's come since to join us at that demonstration. I think it will be a somber memorial for the lives that were lost and the people who are still being held, and it's an important opportunity to show solidarity and strength in the face of this adversity. And at the same time, there's a new organization that has launched called Allies for a Strong Canada. Listeners can visit theallies.ca. And this is an organization that has formed to help build a community of voices standing up against hate in our streets. Whether you can make it out to the in-person gathering or you can connect with this online effort to bring people together, there's strength in numbers. There's a powerful message sent in solidarity. And I encourage people not to brush this aside, but to take action, to stand shoulder to shoulder with Jewish Canadians and Canadians from all walks of life who want to see our cities be more inclusive, more diverse, more open, and to really drive away the hatred, violence, extremism, and darkness that are taking hold increasingly over the last year.
Our chance to all come together as one. Noah Shack, thank you so much for joining us on The Feed.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you missed any part of The Feed, please go to 1059theregion.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to follow 1059 on X and Instagram. I'm Ann Rohmer. Thank you so much for listening.